Bueno, realmente.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure indeed and a great honor to be able to introduce Deputy Sevim Dagdelen from Germany. She is Vice President of the Parliamentarian Left-Wing Group. And above all, she has been a champion of solidarity with Cuba. As I said, she is a deputy, and within the German parliament, she has come up with initiatives asking for the lifting of the blockade against Cuba and the return of the illegally occupied territory in Guantanamo by the U.S. She has also participated in demonstrations in solidarity with our country, and recently she has been supporting the European campaign started in Germany called Unblock Cuba. She has supported all the solidarity work of the very strong solidarity group in Germany. We were able to meet them and exchange with them. Several years ago, I visited Germany, and I was really impressed to know how many solidarity groups there are in Germany, as it is the case for other countries of Europe, but this movement in Germany is very strong. I believe this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to listen to her. She will make a presentation, prospects of peace in times of war, militarization and confrontation of blocs. So without further ado, I will give her the floor. I believe we will have enough time so that you can ask your questions and make your comments. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, compañero.
Thank you very much, comrade.
Dear friends, Your Excellencies, I'm sorry I can't speak Spanish very well, so I'll do my presentation in English.
English?
All right, okay. So it's an honor for me to be given the privilege of addressing you here today as part of this superb program, I have to say. This conference turns the spotlight on the key question of our time, namely how can humanity in all its diversity,
en toda su diversidad podemos llegar a una coexistencia equilibrada. En un contexto de guerra, la militarización y la escalada de la gran confrontación entre los bloques, que bien podría desembocar en una tercera guerra mundial, esta cuestión reviste una importancia existencial. Me dirijo a ustedes como diputada y política de la oposición de izquierda de un país que es parte beligerante en el conflicto de Ucrania. Alemania no solo participa en una guerra económica sin precedentes de Occidente contra Rusia, sino que también participa como en la guerra dirigida por Estados Unidos contra Rusia en suelo ucraniano a través del suministro de armas pesadas, armas, el entrenamiento de soldados ucranianos y brindando apoyo a sus servicios de inteligencia. Debido a la enorme presión de Estados Unidos, hoy el gobierno alemán, el canciller Olaf Scholz, ha decidido enviar tanques de combate tipo Leopard a Ucrania. Se trata de una escalada extremadamente peligrosa que allana el camino para enviar a Alemania directamente a la línea de fuego. Hasta ahora, el suministro de tanques de combate pesados se consideraba un tema totalmente tabú y ha sido una línea roja para el canciller alemán Scholz. En este contexto, es extremadamente preocupante cómo se está acelerando la propaganda de guerra en Alemania. En la opinión pública alemana y en los principales medios de comunicación, este paso se celebra como un hito importante. Inmediatamente después de la decisión del gobierno federal de entregar carros de combate pesados, ahora se pide la entrega de aviones de combate, sistemas como Tornados, Eurofighters, etc. En esta lógica de escalada militar, la entrega de aviones de combate le sigue la de buques de guerra, misiles balísticos y, al final, tropas. Para detener la guerra en Ucrania y evitar una escalada hacia una tercera guerra mundial, necesitamos urgentemente iniciativas diplomáticas. La condición necesaria para el equilibrio del mundo, para un orden mundial justo, para el desarrollo social y la medioambiental, es la ausencia de la violencia militar. La guerra en Ucrania supone para la humanidad un retroceso de años, sino de décadas. En este contexto, me gustaría abordar en mi presentación los siguientes elementos. ¿Cómo se explica el surgimiento de esta guerra? ¿Cuáles son sus efectos en el mundo, en especial en los países del sur global, que no participan en la guerra, pero que se ven afectados de manera significativa por sus consecuencias? ¿Cuáles son las posibles salidas al conflicto y cuáles las perspectivas de un orden mundial basado en la coexistencia pacífica y el equilibrio? Mi tesis inicial consta de tres partes. En primer lugar, la guerra por delegación en Ucrania refleja el intento de parte de Estados Unidos de mantener su supremacía global sin restricciones en una era unipolar que está llegando a su fin. Un elemento fundamental de esta estrategia es el esfuerzo de Estados Unidos desde el final de la Guerra Fría para impedir un orden de seguridad común en Europa que incluya a Rusia. La orden de seguridad común en Europa
because of the political rule of a comprador bourgeoisie to cast off their dependence on the United States and to pursue a sovereign policy attuned to the interests of their own population, a policy aimed at peace, stability, and prosperity. Secondly, the war against Russia, which is being waged primarily on the economic front, is also an inwardly targeted social assault. In Europe, the senseless economic war is tantamount to economic self-amputation and is conducive to a shift in the balance of power within the Western alliance in favor of the United States. The unprecedented militarization in the context of the mobilization against Russia is also being accompanied by a massive bottom-up redistribution of wealth within NATO countries. While low earners despair of meeting the rocketing cost of energy and food because of the economic sanctions, the energy companies are reaping billions in windfall profits. Thirdly, in the hegemony expansion after the end of Cold War. Following the end of the bloc confrontation, instead of helping to build a common European house and home in the spirit of the 1990 the Charter of Paris, the West systematically drove Russia into a corner. Driven by the hubris of belief in the superiority of the capitalist market economy at the end of history proclaimed by Francis Fukuyama, the United States did all in its power to denigrate Russia as the loser of the Cold War. Pushing NATO's boundaries to Russia's borders constitutes a breach of Russia's security interests, which Russia calls an existential threat. In this respect, accession of Ukraine or Georgia to NATO were unmistakably presented as a red line. As more or less severe vassals of the United States, the European Union member states have been unable to find a diplomatic solution that would prevent a military escalation of the Ukraine conflict. Part of that history is also the recent admission made by former German Chancellor Angela Merkel and former French President François Hollande, who acknowledged that there had never been any interest on the part of the West in fulfilling the legal requirements of the Minsk agreement, but the sole objective was to gain time for Ukraine to arm itself. Even after 24 February 2022, when the Russian attacks began, the West scuppered a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine. As early as the end of March 2022, very promising negotiations took place between Russia and Ukraine under Turkish mediation in Istanbul. The withdrawal of the West's support for a ceasefire and a diplomatic agreement has resulted in more than 200,000 dead and wounded military personnel on both sides, 40,000 civilian deaths, and millions of refugees from Ukraine. The pure cynicism of this war is also exemplified by the fact that in the blinded eyes of Western public opinion, solidarity with Ukraine is measured in arms supplies instead of in diplomatic initiative to end the war, while people are being sacrificed on the battlefield in Ukraine to the geopolitical goals of the United States. The Western strategy of seeking to defeat Russia militarily by supplying Ukraine with more and more heavy armaments is foolish and irresponsible. Russia is a nuclear power and is not prepared. Employees in Germany have suffered a 4.7% drop in real incomes, the largest real wage slump in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany. 1 in 4 businesses is planning job cuts in the wake of spiraling energy prices, while entire industries are facing ruin or intend to relocate their production facilities in other countries. What is more, the US is trying, through investment programs worth several $100 billion, to squeeze extra profits out of the disastrous situation at the expense of the European Union. Besides the cannibalization of the West and its self-amputation that are resulting from the economic war, its governments are knowingly accepting the devastating effects of the sanction on large areas of the global South. The Western sanctions against Russia have caused a huge global surge in food and energy prices. Because of the European Union sanctions, export of Russian fertilizers fell 15% last year. According to United Nations data, last year's global grain harvest had already declined by 2.4%, which was due to a fertilizer shortage. While accusing Russia of weaponizing hunger, the West is still undermining the promise made to Russia as part of the UN brokered grain deal that sanction-based restrictions on food and fertilizers would be lifted in full awareness that this will lead to millions more people in the global South dying of starvation. These Western double standards are another reason why the West has failed in its bid to isolate Russia in the global South. In the Western media, a clear North-South divide concerning the war on Ukraine is often overlooked. The fact that fewer than 40 of the 193 United Nations member states have imposed sanctions on Russia, while fewer than 30 have pledged military assistance for Ukraine. This can hardly be described as isolation of Russia by the so-called international community. On the contrary, large countries like China and India are currently intensifying their economic relations with Russia. There is widespread mystification in the global South regarding the assertion that Russian attack on Ukraine marks a historical watershed and an unparalleled violation of international law. NATO's illegal wars, disgraceful crimes against human rights, the bombing of civil infrastructure, as we have seen in the 90s, late 90s against Yugoslavia by the NATO states, the drone killings, the extrajudicial execution, and the selective application of international law have not strengthened the credibility of the West and of its so-called commitments to a rule-based international order, but weakened it. The fact that the countries of the global South are not participating in the economic sanctions against Russia is not without reason. It testifies to the painful experience that many countries have undergone because of the dire consequences of Western sanctions policies. Let me repeat quite clearly that sanctions are an act of war. Or to paraphrase the saying coined by Karl von Clausewitz, sanctions are the continuation of war by economic means. Since they are designed to bring poverty, destitution, and death to the civilian population, economic sanctions are always an inherently violent course of action. This is illustrated by the 500,000 children in Iraq who had to die as a result of the sanction in the 1990s and whose deaths were regarded, in the words of Madeleine Albright, the US Secretary of State at that time, as a, I quote, a price worth paying, end of the quote. For decades, yes, this is the saying of Madeleine Albright. That's what she said in TV. For decades, the West, besides resorting to military invasions, has used sanctions and economic blockades to bring about regime change and to subjugate countries that had been using their democratic sovereignty for their own autonomous development, free from neocolonial exploitation. The inhuman embargo imposed on Cuba by the United States in breach of international law has lasted more than 60 years, costing this country several $billions every year. May I also mention the 40,000 people in Venezuela who, according to a study conducted by the Washington-based Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPA, lost their lives as a result of US sanctions in the years from 2017 to 2019. The self-assured responses to the failed isolation strategy of the West are also a reflection of tectonic shifts in the global power structure. The relative decline of the West and its leading power, the United States, has been accompanied by the meteoric economic development of ascendant powers, especially China. Given the neo-colonial domination of much of the global South, such developments are a thorn in the flesh for the West. It was not without reason that US President Joe Biden described China as the arch enemy of the United States. And at the NATO summit in Madrid last year in June 2022, China was flagged up for the first time as a challenging source of, quote, systemic competition, quote, end, not because China, which unlike the United States has not fought a war for decades, poses a military threat, but rather because China's economy has grown within a very short space of time into the second largest in the world and one of the main drivers of innovation and technological progress. What is at stake in the systemic rivalry proclaimed by the West between democracies versus autocracies is quite simply the defense of its own hegemonic primacy. The accompanying Western policy of expansion and confrontation, as illustrated by the militarization of the Indo-Pacific region, has huge escalation potential. Only yesterday, 24th of January, the hands of the doomsday clock, a metaphor that represents how close humanity is to self-destruction, were edged closer than ever towards midnight by the risk of nuclear war and advancing climate change. The urgent need for action is self-evident, but how can a way out of the present existentially threatening situation be found? In view of the horrific impact of the war in Ukraine on the people there and in very many other parts of the world, and given the real danger of nuclear war, ending that conflict must take priority. The wise and forward-pointing calls made by many countries of the global South for a ceasefire and for a diplomatic solution that will bring an early end to the war are in tune with the deep wish of most of the population in Western countries for peace, security, and stability. This common interest must be harnessed to bring forth a peaceful solution and for the time thereafter. Like almost all wars, this one can only be ended through negotiations. It will not be possible to arrive at a peaceful solution by sidestepping the issue at the heart of the conflict, namely NATO enlargement and Ukraine neutrality. Unrealistic demands such as full restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, including the Crimea, will make any compromise impossible from the outset. Unlikely though it may now seem, peace and security are possible in the long term, but only with a European security structure to supersede the NATO policy of confrontation and arms accumulation. Achievement of this goal depends on Europe freeing itself from US domination and pursuing its own independent, sovereign, foreign and security policy. This should be based on a fundamental quest for peaceful coexistence through diplomacy and conciliation of interests. It also involves preventing any tightening of the bloc confrontation between the West and China and refusing to be drawn into the US economic war with China, also to avoid the consequences of a ruinous decoupling from China. We must be clearly aware, however, that we in Europe, as was the case in Latin America before the Cuban and Bolivarian revolutions, are now confronted with comprador bourgeoisies that seem only to be pursuing the interests of US corporations and following foreign policy instructions from Washington, D.C. The recent decision of supplying heavy tanks, battle tanks, show that Europe and Germany in particular are submitting to the US strategy to conclusively destroy European-Russian relations and to be sent into Russia's line of fire. The democratic emancipation of Europe from the US is thus a question of to be or not to be. It has become an issue of existential importance in Europe. To the countries of the South, the current trend towards a multipolar world order offers a great opportunity. The economic and geopolitical weight of international groupings such as BRICS, bloc of countries, which are home to 40% of the global population, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but also of anti-hegemonic regional organizations such as CELAC and the African Union, could potentially enable these bodies to renegotiate international economic relationships and restore democratic sovereignty. Recent political developments in Latin America were for the first time in history the 6 largest economies of the region have left-wing or center-left governments, can also decisively advance self-determinate regional integration politically and economically. When we discuss a new world economic order here, the experiences of the Regional Alternative Alliance, ALBA, or TCP, which was launched more than 18 years ago by Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, are of crucial importance for a solidary, complementary economy. So our alternative financial institutions like the Banco del Sur and the Banco del Alba. In a world marred by war, neocolonial exploitation, growing inequality, and environmental destruction, the common task for progressive forces in the West, as in the South, is to reflect on new, fairer, multilateral alternatives for global equilibrium in place of neoliberal globalization and to make them a reality. In this spirit, let me express my gratitude for this great conference, and it takes place in the right place, in Cuba. I look forward to the continuing discussion with you. Another world is possible. We are not abandoning hope. Thank you very much for your attention.
No.
First of all, I would like to thank very much Sevim for her presentation. I believe that this has been most interesting for all of us, particularly for the subjects she dealt in her presentation, urgent matters, all of them. Very well explained during this presentation. We cannot but think about Jose Marti and his thoughts, not to think about the ideas of Fidel about all of these items, and of course the risks facing humanity at present, which are a source of major concern. There are many interesting ideas for us to discuss about them. Now we can open the floor for the audience to make their questions and comments.
¿Quién se anima? Por allá.
For your brilliant lecture. I have a few comments and I will also ask. My name is Matias.
Sí, ¿podía presentarse, por favor?
Yes.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Introducing myself now. My name is Matias Pires. I'm from Angola, in Africa. So if we see the history, we will find that during First and Second World War, Germany was defeated. And after both, Germany adopted the neutral position, and that's why it became a powerful European economy country. But now we see like United States is forcing Germany and all European Union countries to go to the war to become lowest in their economy, and then United States will save his powerful status. So, my few questions. What is the benefits you are getting on the Ukraine conflict? As I say, when I say you, I mean you, European Union, you, German, not you personally. So I think you have to think about, because in the beginning of the conflict, United Kingdom was on front, but now we see like Madame Ursula, who is the foreign, what do we say? What the defense minister of Germany in the past, but is pressing your country to be more involved in the world. And we see that the minister, Christine Lambert, gone away, and now you decide to send the Leopard tanks in Ukraine, but United States is refusing to send his Abrams. So you have a very close economic cooperation with Russia in terms of the oil and energy supply. That's why I'm asking what, in concrete, the benefits Germany will get on this conflict. Thanks.
Sí. ¿Alguna otra?
Any other question? Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Ernesto Romero Robledo. My question is about the perspectives. Which are the perspectives in Europe about the change of the relations of power, modifying the international structure of power after the war in Ukraine? This has become sort of explicit. The American world power has been diminishing. New actors internationally have come up suggesting new political models. So which is the prospects in Germany regarding this modification of the international balance of forces? There is a possibility, and this is a question, is there any possibility for Europe to witness different power relations as different from the U.S.?
I have an important question for Germany, and not you personally. So we've had 2 world wars where the German people have lost so much in the rest of Europe. And Herr Schulz gave a very good talk this morning about the role that Germany played, or German people, in building an anti-war movement against the American war in Vietnam. Now, in New Zealand, we've never been part of NATO, but it's now 360 degrees NATO with a blue Pacific strategy aimed at China, and we're now a non-member cooperating partner. We've only got about 2 tanks, so we can't send any to the Ukraine, which is good. But what I want to bring back to New Zealand is hope that in a country that's had such horrific history and destruction in war, that there will be a movement built to abolish NATO, or at least pull out of NATO, because we need this hope. New Zealanders do know where Germany is, do look to it. And so if you could build such a movement and give us such a present, that would be very helpful to us, but I'm sure to other countries as well.
One more question. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to Cuba. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation.
Usted decía al
You
inicio de
said
su
at the beginning
intervención
of your presentation
que los países
that
occidentales
the Western
han
countries
resultado rehenes
have happened
de la
to
política
become
norteamericana.
hostages of the American policy. Thinking in the same direction of the questions asked here, I would like to know your opinion. To what an extent is there any rupture? I'm referring to the situation facing the NATO bloc. We are witnessing a group of contradictions between Turkey and Greece, contradictions in countries of the European Union and NATO opposed to the delivery of weapons. They either do it openly or they do it in a covert way, but there are countries which have not expressed themselves in bloc, although the position in support to the U.S. and in support of the war of NATO in Ukraine through the Ukrainian lamb that is being slaughtered by the U.S., not always this support is shaped as a bloc. What is your opinion? To what an extent the left-wing forces could make use of this situation for the benefit of a counter-offensive in Europe against militarism under the present circumstances? I would also like to ask you, what is your opinion about the position of Turkey, a member of NATO that has expressed certain positions regarding this conflict? We all read the media. We know which are the current positions adopted by Turkey, particularly after the year 2021 and the expulsion of the NATO bases from Turkey. And third, you talked about 200,000 military dead and 40,000 civilians dead. This is very interesting. Ursula spoke about 100,000 deaths, but the information disappeared from the Twitter. I mean, the data of the number of deadly casualties. Could you please elaborate a little bit more about this? Thank you. We have too many questions, and we have to make the best use of our time here for so many questions. And Sevim, you have the floor.
Gracias. Maybe first, in imperialism, there are always contradictions within the imperialist states. So it's not such an exceptional situation that there are contradictions, different interests. For example, You can't hear it, or you can't hear me very well? Oh, yeah, now. Okay, thank you.
Now looks better.
Okay. I think it's not an exceptional situation that you have in an imperialism that you have contradictions. Even within the imperialist states, you have contradictions and contradictory interests. So I don't think that it's exceptional now regarding Greece and Turkey, for example. But Turkey plays an interesting role in this conflict, we have to admit. It doesn't support the sanctions as a NATO state, as a NATO member state, but it does supply arms, we have to say. Turkey is sending drones to Ukraine, and these drones the Ukrainians are using against Russia in this hot conflict at the moment, so it's trying to follow their own economical interests, and I think we have to see that there is a special conditions on Turkey at the moment because they are going into the presidential elections. That is one of the reasons. They have the economical crisis, suffering very much from the economical crisis. I mean, President Erdogan took a profit and benefit from the grain agreement. Very clever, he did. Strategically, very clever move that he said, I have the first right to get grain as much I need in the grain deal. Between Russia and Ukraine. That was a clever move to make sure that they have grain enough in Turkey, seeing the crisis there is rising. So, but I don't see that there is such a move, you know, against NATO. That was for a long time the goal and the hidden agenda of the Russian administration. They thought they can try to bring a contradiction, a fundamental contradiction into the NATO by getting Turkey on their side, but that's not going to work. It's always been pro-US-led administration, even though Erdogan tries to be more independent and more autonomous, but they are not going against NATO. It's a lot of interior policy at the moment playing a role regarding the elections, upcoming elections, even the thing with Sweden at the moment to say that they are going to say no for the NATO membership of Sweden. I having doubt that Turkey at the end will say no. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is a dealer, is a player. He wants to raise the price for his yes for the Swedish membership of the NATO. But of course there are contradictions, but it's always, you know, like this. And the other thing is, what is the benefit of this Ukraine war for Germany and European Union? Well, there is no benefit at all. That's the problem. And we are suffering. The people of Europe are suffering from these sanctions. And we all actually say it's an economic war against Russia, but we have to correct this. The energy sanctions against Russia are an economic war against the own population of European countries, because the war is against the lower income, the employees, the working class in the European countries. It's not against Russia. It's actually against the own population. As I told you, we have such a real income loss, the biggest in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany, and it's the same in the different other countries. I mean, for one of the strongest economical powers in the world, we have such a loss and damages, And for countries like Spain or the periphery of European Union, it's way worse than in Germany, relatively spoken. And the thing is, there is no benefit at all, but nevertheless, the German government is following this US-led policy. And of course, we can ask ourselves how insane must be the German government to do such a policy. Yeah, but we can understand this only if we see that we have a very big influence in Germany by the United States. That's the thing. We try to have a own sovereign energy policy with Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and they blow it up. The biggest terrorist attack on the sovereignty of European policy on energy, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. The investigations are classified. The German government is not even sharing the investigations on this terrorist attack with members of the parliament. They don't say a word about these investigations on Nord Stream 1 and 2. And it's actually a terrorist attack on our sovereignty, but nothing happens. So there is no benefit. We are losing our economy. We are losing our power, our political power itself. And not only this, we are probably losing our future as well because of the high risk of escalation and extension of this war in Ukraine to a third world war. And even if it's not a third world war worldwide, but the problem is it can extend to a nuclear war in Europe, in the European continent. And I always said the US administration and the United States, of course, they are safe 8,000 kilometers away from the European continent and from this war. And they are safe from the reaction of the Russian administration to sending battle tanks and then maybe aircraft system and so on, so escalating the war. Because the United States, I think, they have the strategy to push Germany, especially Germany, into the front line of this fire, to be the target of the reaction of Russia. Because it was always, George Friedman was the one, Brzezinski, and everyone else actually from the elite in the United States, they always wanted to destroy Russian-German relations for good. And they are now very much successful on this. So now we have no energy relations anymore with the United States. We are getting the benefiters, because you asked from Angola, what is your benefit? We have no benefit. The only one who has benefits on this conflict is the military-industrial complex in the United States and the US fracking industry in the United States. They have the most benefits. And of course, in a geopolitical way, they are, and economically also, they are getting rid of a competitor like the European Union in the economy. They are getting rid of it. So they are having the benefits. And you asked about the perspectives and the hope. I have to be very frank. We are, at the moment, a lot is at stake, a lot. Because I do think that it's a historic, very historic, wrong decision by the German government to send battle tanks. We have now, today is the 25th or 26th? 25th of January. On the 31st of January, we have the 80th anniversary of the battle in Stalingrad, where millions of Russians lost their lives. You talked about World War I and World War II. In World War II, 27 million Soviet Union citizens lost their lives. In every single family of Russia, they lost their loved ones in Second World War, in Stalingrad battle. And now we are sending again German tanks against Russia around the 80th anniversary of Stalingrad battle. And it's just, you know, it's incredible what is possible at the moment. And we are one taboo after the other one is falling because the US is pressuring so much Germany and the other European states to go into this war, this proxy war, United States versus Russia in Ukraine on the soil, on the Ukrainian soil. They want to have this war. My thesis is they want to see blood. They want to see the inferno in Europe to clean up for the imperialist interests. You have the hegemony of the United States, it's going down because China is rising. And I think, like Emmanuel taught, the philosopher in France, that we already have the Third World War. It's already going, it's already started, and we have to do everything to stop the war before it escalates more. The economical Third World War is already going. It's already acting, and that's why I think we need in Europe a policy like that of the Bolivarian Revolution in Latin America, a policy of emancipation from the interest of the big US corporations. That's what we need. And my hope is that so fast, like the German government moves into this war, hopefully we can so fast organize the peace movement everywhere in the countries to stop these warmongers, you know, because the future of human civilization, at least in Europe, European continent, is at stake at the moment. And as I told you, we are not abandoning hope. We fight for the hope, but we have to be aware of the serious situation we are in at the moment. And I can't believe when politicians are talking, you know, seriously risking nuclear war in Europe with mini nukes or whatever. They're insane, you know, they're really insane. We have to fall into the arms of these warmongers to tell them, you know, to stop the escalation and to stop this proxy war. And I just told one of my friends, compañeros from Spain, we as left persons, we failed after 2014 to see that the United States is using Ukraine as a front state against Russia. We failed to see it very serious and clear and to act very fast. But we shouldn't fail now. We have to act now. And that's why I'm grateful for this conference to share this with you. I hope I gave all of you some sort of answers. Thank you.
Just one second, just to add that the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, today, since yesterday, he's working in my country.
I know.
Bueno, excelente, realmente.
Excellent presentation, both the presentation by Sevim as well as the exchange and the questions. This has very much enriched the debate. We are all now much more moved because we know the risks facing humanity, but we should reflect upon these subjects as Marty suggested with these ideas. And it is this conference is taking place in a very timely moment. We should circulate these presentations as much as possible. We should work for peace, which is more threatened than ever, as she advised. It will always be too little what each of us could do in order to stop somehow this madness that we see going on in the world, an unbalanced, totally unbalanced world. And I believe that these ideas, these presentations should make us reflect and take action, which is the most important thing, take action in order to somehow modestly contribute to hope for a better fate for the world. Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for your questions.
I know your situation. I have contact with friends, you know. I had contact with friends.
Are we ready? Are we ready?
Yes.
Should yeah. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all. My name is Teresita Vicente. I am a Cuban ambassador. I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba, and I have the great honor this afternoon to introduce Mrs. Liz Dimenswell, Vice President of the Board of the Wall Beyond Wall and National Coordinator of Aotearoa, New Zealand. She was Vice President of the International Women's League for Peace and Freedom of New Zealand. She was awarded the Peace Award Sonia Davies in 2017. She studied about the literacy with the Peace Foundation of the Nuclear Era in California. She is a member of the International Disarmament Committee of the NC Peace Foundation and coordinator of the Pacific Peace Network. Liz directs a radio program called Witness for Peace, defending the nonviolent forms to settle conflicts. She works with the Code Pink China campaign. China is not our enemy, among others. She has developed an intensive community work in the district where she works to plant posters for peace and educate people of every age. This is her first visit to Cuba.
I'm so pleased to present Liz. Liz, welcome. Welcome to Cuba. It's your first visit, right? Bienvenida, Liz.
Welcome, Liz, to Cuba. Thank you very much. Go ahead. You have the floor. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Adelante.
Thank you, Teresa. Buenas tardes, Senora, and
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you.
kind words and for the beautiful welcome to us all. And I am here with our delegation from Nova Zelanda, with Deidre and Jane and Ton and also Matt. And Deidre and Matt will be doing presentations tomorrow and the next day as well. And also our Executive Director, David Swanson from Virginia, will be arriving tomorrow also and doing a presentation. So we're very, very happy to be here. And big thanks to the Cuban ambassador to New Zealand, His Excellency Edgardo, and also big gracias to ECAP, the Cuban Friendship Society, and especially to Victor and Fernando and Lema and Ivan for the lovely welcome. I just want to invite you just to turn to somebody next to you and say hello. And what do you think of peace in your life? Please just turn to your neighbor and say hello. Okay, gracias, gracias. It's, for me, connection between people is really important. Making those connections is one way towards peace. And as I come from Aotearoa, New Zealand, Nova Zelanda, I also like to start with a little invocation or prayer or karakia. Ha ki roto, breathe in. Ha ki waho, breathe out. Kia tau te Māori e kokiri nei. Settle the Māori that stirs inside me. I ngā peke me ngā heke, through ups and downs, ko te rangi Māori e taku e ngā nei. It is peace that I seek. Tihei Māori ora. Kia ora. There is an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, who said, if there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbours. If there is to be peace between neighbours, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. And it's the spirit of that peaceful connection which started the Peace Pole project, which I'm going to share with you. It was started in Japan in 1955 in response to the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was started by a man called Masahisa Goi, who dedicated his life towards creating peace poles all around the world because he was greatly affected by the nuclear bombings. And so now you will find them all over the world, such as the Egyptian pyramids in Gaza and by the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and back in New Zealand. Our group approached our local city council and we got some funding to build 43 peace poles. They stand about 2 meters high. And they each have the words, "May peace prevail on earth," in 86 languages, including Te Reo Māori, the language of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we made some metal plaques with the words on them in the languages, and we got the support from a local Rotary club, because Rotary is a great supporter of peace. And they helped us install these 43 peace poles in our local park. We had the support of our local Indigenous tribe, Ngāti Kaungunu, and also the Multicultural Society, who came along and read those words, "May peace prevail on earth," in the poles in many, many languages. And now I'm going to show you a video of that day.
This is the Hawke's Bay Soul Choir. It's a privilege to be here today to celebrate peace.
So we had a beautiful day, and those poles stayed in our city park all summer for 4 months. And then we took them out and we gifted them to local communities, to schools, to churches, to temples, to parks, to hospitals, even to a prison. And we are working with our leaders of our community, and we're working with organizations who are working for non-violence in our community towards creating peace, with the poles as a reminder and as a challenge and a stimulus, so we can live in peace and so we can actually learn and teach and train ourselves the ways of peace in a practical way, the same way as we prepare for war by training and teaching people to make war. We want to switch the balance towards teaching and training for peacemaking. As Teresa mentioned, I'm now the Vice President of World Beyond War, which is quite a new global peace organization. It's only been around for about nearly 10 years. Started in 2014 by David Sponson, who's coming tomorrow, and also David Hartsoe, with the desire of having a global peace movement. So we want to work together, and that's why we've come this long, long way. It took us 2 days to fly here, all the way from Aotearoa, because we want to share the message of peace, and we want to ask you to please join us in this work. We have many, many different other organizations we are working with, nearly 100 different organizations. We have 7 staff. We have over 20 chapters in 10 countries, and we have members in 192 countries. So I really invite each one of you to please go and look at our website, World Beyond War, and see if you can sign up and become part of us. The reason, the thing that sums up what we do really is our peace pledge, which says, I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protect us, that they kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, and infants, severely damaging the natural environment, erode civil liberties, and drain our economy, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support non-violent efforts to end all war and preparations for war, and to create a sustainable and just peace. So that is our peace pledge, and I would be delighted if everybody can sign this and ask your friends and your family and your organizations to sign and join this. As I mentioned, the world has a long way to go towards teaching non-violence, and we must put resources into teaching and training, because killing is not natural to humans. We need to be taught to kill. People who join the army need to be taught to dehumanize the enemy, see them as less than human. And there is a man called Paul K. Chappell who teaches peace literacy, and he has written many books describing this whole process. But if we can train armies to kill, then why don't we teach peace? Teaching peace has many forms. It can be non-violent communication, it can be mediation, it can be meditation, creativity, alternatives to violence projects, and many other things. It's endlessly possible. There is also some proof that non-violence resistance is a lot more effective than war making. A professor Erica Chenoweth in the United States studied many campaigns of civil resistance from 1900 to 2006 and discovered that non-violent resistance was twice as successful as violent campaigns. And she also found that as little as 3.5% of people can make a difference, and governments struggle to withstand a challenge from 3.5% of the population without accommodating their wishes. Our organisation, World Beyond War, we do a lot of activities all around. We do a lot online, so it's very accessible for everybody. We have had some conferences where we meet up in person, for example, in Ireland and in the United States. But with COVID, it became a lot more difficult, of course. But we do host film festivals online. There's one coming up soon. We run courses on many things such as war and the environment, and education courses. We have three main things that we work on. One is an anti-bases campaign. As you know, there are many hundreds of bases, particularly United States bases outside the United States. And we have a monitoring tool online which shows what those bases are doing. And we have an active campaign and work with many veterans for peace to try and close those bases. And of course, we would very much love to see Guantanamo base closed here in this beautiful country. We also have the other thing we do is peace education and also divesting from weapons. And the divestment campaigns are very, very important. And they are something that people in the public can get involved with, whether it's students with university endowment funds, whether it's municipalities and states, or pension funds, retirement funds. There's lots of ways that the public can push for public money to be divested from weapons companies and spent and invested in good things that all people need. We have another campaign called Save Sinjaneva in Montenegro, where a beautiful uninhabited mountaintop is being turned into a military base, and we support those people campaigning for that. And David Swanson has also just written a book on the Monroe Doctrine, which is 200 years old now, and how to replace that. Two of our board members are actively involved in working towards peace in Ukraine. They have created the Zaporizhzhia Protection Proposal to create a non-violent, unarmed action group to protect the nuclear power plant. There is a danger of a mishap or a catastrophe worse than Chernobyl from this power plant, which has 37 years of nuclear waste contaminating around it, which could contaminate thousands of kilometres if it was exploded by combat weapons during the war. Already the shelling has damaged some of the infrastructure, and power lines for cooling have been destroyed. So with this danger, there is a call to establish nuclear safety and security protection zone, and there is work to establish an unarmed civilian protection team to prevent nuclear explosion. People are needed to train to accompany workers and patrol the demilitarized zone until governments agree to protect this. We also have a campaign, a 3% plan to end starvation. a fraction of the military budget of over $2 trillion in the world and rising could be used to end starvation on Earth. For example, if the United States military budget scaled back by just 3%, there would still be over twice that of its enemies combined. The United Nations said that in 2008 it would take $30 billion a year to end hunger. And the Pentagon budget in 2019 totaled over $1 trillion. 3% of that is over $30 billion. Imagine if every country could be asked to scale back their spending on military so the resources from that could be used for food, medicine, education, and all the things that all of us need. We also are asking for carbon emissions to be counted in military, by the military. Military are still exempt from the protocols on carbon. And whereas the arms and armies are the worst polluters and the biggest producers of carbon, but no one is counting the cost. It's not reported. Exemptions have been requested and guaranteed as far back as Kyoto. But for example, the Norwegians discovered that one F-35 fighter jet burns 5,500 litres of fossil fuel every hour in the air. The average car can drive 61,000 kilometres on that amount, around 3 years of driving. We demand that world leaders address this. So, once again, I thank you for being here today and coming to support the peace movement. And I ask you to please go to our website, World Beyond War, and look at what we do, look at the work we do. Please sign our peace pledge and ask your organisations and your family and friends to join us in this great big work that we are doing. Please think about starting a chapter. And I'm here all week and I'd love to talk to you and to talk further about this. And before I introduce again my friends here, are there any questions, please?
Sí, por favor.
Yes, please, the floor is open. Alberto Padron from the Cultural Association, Jose Marti from Matanzas. I wanted to ask you about the campaign you described, a question related to the campaign you described, Education for Peace. I would like to know what kind of work are you carrying out with the new generations, because that is very important to involve children in this kind of campaign for the development of peace, because children learn first about the war and then they are talked about peace. They play war, and if you are doing something to reverse that, to have them first to learn to dialogue and settle conflicts through dialogue, that would be a very important contribution for the near future. That is my question.
No.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. Yes. Well, that's extremely important to educate the young people, and, you know, right from kindergarten. And in fact, children can probably teach us. So in my country, we work with the Peace Foundation, who do mediation in schools, teach young children to mediate between themselves. And we call for there to be more education because there's not enough. It should be, you know, we have so many departments of military and we don't have departments of peace because the governments don't prioritise peacemaking and training children like they should be. So there is a global organisation which is promoting setting up departments and for peace and ministries of peace. Also, our organisation works with the Rotary clubs and supports young people working together in peace. We have a very strong youth division, and our education officer, Phil Gittins, who actually is a fluent Spanish speaker, he's working with young people especially to educate them. But there is always more that needs to be done and more resources need to be put towards this. Thank you.
Bases militares estadounidenses.
Then we are under this new government because this is the desire of Colombians to have all of these military bases contributing nothing to peace under the present government. To be expelled from the country. I do not know if from your organization you could carry out a sort of launch a call, because we know that our government is very receptive. It would be very important to get support at the international level to put pressure on the U.S. government to withdraw those military bases from Colombia. We do not want them. We are not being benefited by them, and they do encourage the warmongering spirit among some of the belligerent elements that we still have in my country. This is my question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And we are already working with some anti-bases organizations in Colombia we have a global anti-bases organization, because there are many countries which are trying to get rid of their bases, and so we have a group of people who are working in Japan and Okinawa and Colombia and Australia and England and the Philippines and other places, Canada also. So it's a very, 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 very big and important problem, because, as you know, they cause so many problems for the local people and so much pollution and so much exploitation without giving anything back. And also yeah, would love to talk to you how we can work with you together. Deirdre would like to respond to the question about what to do for children that the gentleman asked earlier.
Kia ora. We've got a list of different organisations and tools that work specifically with children. The things that we've found that have been most useful is anything that kind of supports the child to stay fully embodied in themselves, and whether that's meditation or mindfulness, yoga practices, and deep breathing. If we go, and I can help you with any of these exercises afterwards, if you want to see me after, I can talk you through a whole lot of different processes. Also, the importance of working with professional artists. Now, we work with like the Royal Ballet and Dance Exchange and Optima Housing and Healthy Living to work with young people who are at the risk of suicide and elevate their self-esteem by working with professionals and with top quality professionals, and that builds up them and helps them release the embedded trauma and move into safe touch. And if we can move them into safe touch, then they become the autonomous control of their body, and they're able to then influence themselves and their peers. And we've seen them successfully then engage with the complexities within the gangs in their areas, and it gives them an opportunity to move away from gang membership and into autonomous bodily control, but also it gives them right relationships, which decreases the amount of sexual abuse, and and also decreases the number of unwanted pregnancies and things like that. So it has a lot of different knock-on effects, and there's also some transformative processes with regard to permaculture and stuff, where people make connections to the land, and with that understanding, the kind of spiritual or the Maori or the Wairua element, which helps particularly with the recovery of people who've been combatants, young combatants as well. So all of those, there's a whole bunch of different tools, and depending on what kind of trauma or what history, you can kind of fit them. But I'm really happy to talk to you at length about different ones that do work and where you can get resources from too. Okay.
¿Alguna otra?
Any other question or comment? Gentlemen, please.
Thank you, Liz, for making us aware of the wonderful work that you're doing. My query actually is a mix of both the previous queries and about demographics. In all the work that you're doing, what's the kind of demographic that you find it easier to work with? And it could be anything, either men or women, or the younger adults versus those who are elder. It could be between effectively any sort of demographic that you can actually identify that you find easier to work with as compared to any other demographic.
Thank you for the question. I don't really know the answer to that question, I'm sorry. Do you have any ideas yourself?
No, so where I'm coming from is invariably I've seen, especially in India, whenever we try and have conversations around peace, around equality, around humanity, invariably I think for each movement, for each such organization, for each such conversation, it becomes very difficult to cater to all types of demographics. It becomes very difficult that the youth is also involved, and those who are elder who are also involved, men are involved and women are involved, all involved being equally involved. And you would find a particular movement or a particular organization that primarily has members who are the young people, right? And then you find another organization doing exactly the same work, which are primarily those who are elder. Right? And then that synergy becomes very difficult to create, because while everyone's doing very similar things, but they're catering to different demographics. Now, of what at least I understood of the wonderful work that you're doing and all the members that you have, it seemed to be very homogeneous. It seemed to be that you've managed to find a way in which different demographics are actually coming together. You seem to have a bit of an equality with respect to your members, right? So I wanted to learn from you in terms of if there's anything that you've done to actually create that space where everyone from different walks of life are actually coming and joining you.
Well, thank you. Well, we ask them, and it's become kind of harder because since there's been a build-up of militarism, it used to be, like my father was in World War II, and he hated war, and many of the soldiers, they hated it, and it was sort of fading away, the memories were fading away, but then there was like the centenary, and it became more the centenary of World War I, and the government seemed to get more young people involved, etc. But when we did this, working on this project, we've gone to everybody. For example, we've went to the Return Services Association, invited them, and tried to do it in a way that was inclusive and saying, because it can be quite hard to work with people with still respecting, their service, but trying to tap into that part of a person which does not want to ever go to war again. And so, we've just, through talking to people and being very gentle and not being kind of threatening to them or disrespectful to them. But it is quite challenging because all of a sudden, like, there's a new war that started in the last year, and there's so much support for war making and not enough support for peacemaking, and people don't seem to be asking the questions of why isn't there more peace process, why isn't there more talking, more diplomacy, more dialogue, stopping the war. It just seems like there's massive amnesia of the costs and damage of war.
Thank you very much. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Alguna otra intervención?
Any other question or comments? I just wanted to reiterate that in my country, in Cuba, we are also defending very much peace, and that here we are struggling to create a zone of peace in the Americas. That is an idea first launched by our leaders several years ago. Therefore, all issues related to the work to develop peace are most interesting to all of us. That is why I express my interest in knowing about your experience. In my opinion, very valuable. I wanted to add this for you to know why we are very much interested in that.
Thank you very much. Is there a question for that as well? Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Yes. Yes, thank you. Very important that we work together and we keep on talking about it. And I'd like to invite Deirdre and Jane and Matt and Tom just to say a few words as well, being kind enough to share this platform with me before we go. Jane, would you like to say something about nonviolent communication?
Good afternoon. I feel very honored to be here in Cuba. It's my first visit too. My personal passion is for the processes of non-violent communication. like Liz, I see that if we can change at the individual level, things can change. And so for those of you who know Marshall Rosenberg's process that he developed maybe 20 years ago, bringing together spirituality and psychology and face-to-face interactions. My vision is for people to start using nonviolent communication, NVC, on social media. Social media has fingers that go into almost every household in every country across the world. If nonviolent communication could go viral on social media, we can make huge change in a small amount of time. So my request to you would be, if you haven't tried nonviolent communication on social media, give it a go. Choose the angriest, most difficult, most objectionable person and respond to them. It's exciting, the journey, and almost always it creates change. I once was interacting with somebody in the United States. He was a gun-toting, Trump-supporting Republican, and his views were very different from mine. But with respect and with about 8 or 10 interactions where he was very aggressive and I was very honoring of his needs and his feelings, it turned out he was a father with a child, a daughter that was about to go to school, and he was scared for her. And that was at the basis of his violence. And so for me, if we can be on social media, maybe each did one interaction each day, we could change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Matt, would you like to say a few words? Matt is a former Minister of Disarmament with the New Zealand government, and he has a lot of experience.
No, because it's Ramit's time. Matt Robson, I was a Minister of the New Zealand government, but what I will do is give an advertisement for my speaking on Friday at 10 o'clock in room 4, Sala 4, and I will tell you there the role of New Zealand in becoming a nuclear-free country in 1985, the same year as the United States was trying to overthrow the Sandinista government with the Contras. We decided we didn't want any nuclear weapons, and the United States could sail away. And don't send your airplanes, don't send your boats. Well, they threw a big tantrum, and they shouted, and they sent a most awful man called George Shultz, the Secretary of State for the United States. He was an advertisement for the ugly American. He was overweight. He smoked a cigar, and he shouted at us. So we used Jane's technique of saying, thank you very much, why don't you go home? But being a white, rich country, we have an indigenous population, but the majority were white. The United States did not invade us, so we were lucky. We weren't like Nicaragua, but the New Zealand people stuck to being nuclear free. 1968 at the Treaty of Tlatelolco in Mexico, they'd beaten us. We didn't mind getting the silver medal. Mexico could have the gold medal. Latin America, nuclear, free of nuclear weapons. It took us some time, but it's now a policy embedded. No New Zealander will give up being nuclear weapon free. We won that, even though we were right in the clause of the empire. So it's a lesson that you can win, or we can win. We're 5 million people. But more on Friday at 10 o'clock in Sala 4, I will tell you all about it. So bring your friends. I haven't got one of these. I can't work them. I'm too old. But I will sing a song for you if you come from New Zealand. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And Deidre is also doing a presentation tomorrow at 11:30 in Sala 11 on Heart to Heart, an artist's journey to a peaceful planet. And David Swanson also on Friday the 27th at 12 o'clock on the Monroe Doctrine. And finally, I'd just like to thank my husband Ton, who's very supportive and kind and helping us in this work. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi nui.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to all participants, and I wanted to express our satisfaction over the beautiful dialogue that we have established this afternoon. I would like to thank our presenters a lot for their support to the noble cause of the Cuban people in the struggle for the recovery of the illegally occupied territory in Guantanamo. There is an invitation for you to visit their website and sign up for their cause, and I will take the three beautiful words expressed here: peace, love, and unity. Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to all participants. We have had a very tough day today, and we have a challenge whenever we close the session. Everybody is feeling a little bit tired, but we do not feel it really today because we will be able to close this session of master lectures with Mr. Ramit Singh Chimni, a co-founder of the foundation 8 Goals, 1 Objective. As from yesterday in the evening, we were able to meet him. He has been the promoter of a contest of drawings about Jose Marti in India. And yesterday evening in our National Library, Jose Marti, we opened the exhibition of all the works he brought, and we were able to know and recognize that effort he made. Once again, we are thanking him for what he has done for Cuba and for Jose Marti. And he brings a presentation with a very suggestive title, The Machine That Controls the World. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. So a few things. I've actually prepared a script for the first time in my life because I know we have about 40-45 minutes and it's the last session of the day. And this, what I'm going to be talking about, is so close to my heart that usually I go well over time. So I'm going to control myself and stick to the script. Before we begin, though, I think there's one thing that I would definitely want all of us to do, is to collectively thank the entire nation of Cuba and the organizers of this conference for giving us the opportunity to be with them right now over here. Because an opportunity such as this is not one that comes about very often. Yeah. And for the country of Cuba to give us this opportunity, for all of us to get together and have these very, very important conversations is worthy of an applause. So if all of you, I know it's the end of the day, but can please applause for the entire country of Cuba. Right, thank you. Cuba is amongst the very few countries, and I don't go as far as saying that it's the only country because my knowledge may be limited, but Cuba is one of the very few countries that has survived putting its people first when it comes to building and running the nation. I say survived only because the capitalistic nations, who a large part of the world aspires to follow, told us that it was not possible. We were told time and again that we must favor money and trade and open markets and economies over the well-being and care of our own people. If, that is, we are to be a part of the so-called developed world. We were told that we must favor the few who would amass wealth with the promise that they would then provide for the masses, whether they be companies or they be governments. We were shown the illusion of a free world if we were to follow them, and of a world that will struggle and face hardships if we did not follow them. Cuba chose not to follow. Cuba did not follow. Just like its heroes, Cuba too, like Marti and Fidel, Cuba did not concede to the capitalistic propaganda of North American and European nations at that time. And that is not to say that Cuba is free from hardships. There are, of course, plenty of hardships which obstructs Cuba's own path to achieving its dream. I'm certain that these hardships and struggles that my friends here face in their daily lives can only be understood by those who face them, not by the rest of us who are not from Cuba. But I've also learned that the same friends would choose facing these hardships every time over choosing to follow the solutions provided by the capitalist nations, because they truly understand the merits and demerits of these solutions. They know that while Cuba at times faces a shortage of food due to the disrupted supply chains, people in Cuba endure with the quality and the quantity that they get to eat, because the reality of the rest of the world is that despite the solutions of the capitalistic nations and those who follow them, the same nations are struggling with hunger in their populations, where at times many people in those countries do not get to eat food at all for days on end. They know, my Cuban friends, they know that while some houses in Cuba might be old and sometimes without modern facilities, if they were to follow the capitalists, their own people may soon be sleeping on the roadside like many in other countries do, even in London and New York, the two financial capitals of the world. They acknowledge, my Cuban friends, they acknowledge that sometimes Cubans have to manage with hospitals without the latest technology and a poor supply of medicines. But there are countries under the care of capitalistic powers that cannot even save the lives of their own people due to a lack of doctors and how expensive their healthcare is, not just for the poor, but also for the working population. They know, my friends in Cuba, they know that at times salaries in Cuba are less for the highest of posts, but at least the people who work here, they work hard with a smile on their faces and with harmony between both their personal and professional lives, while they see the rest of the world struggle with what they call the work-life balance, with mental illnesses, with depression, and often suicides. While the people under the influence of the intoxicating American dream struggle to pay for food, shelter, education, and healthcare, Cuba has found a way to make them free for all, in spite of the blockade. That is why Cuba has never, and will never, at least that is my hope and my dream, agree to the solutions given by the capitalists. Because the capitalist narrative has tempted us with the promise of luxury and comfort. But Cuba has always been convinced to follow the ideals of equity, peace, and harmony, the ideals of José Martí. Let me also tell you that the capitalistic narrative has not been wholly inaccurate, though. It hasn't. People have found lives filled with luxury and comfort in those countries. But it is only for the few rich people. And it has come at the cost of the lives of thousands of poor people who struggle to survive and make ends meet in the best of the countries all over the world. That has been the solution of the capitalists, the solution of an open economy. And yet, we may find those who would think that an open economy is better than living like this. To them, I would simply extend an invitation to live in these economies. Because when they live in the US, in America, they would realize the number of loans some of them would need to take to be able to afford their housing, basic education, and regular healthcare, which dictates the rest of their lives. When they live in Europe, they would find that some of them have to work extra hours just to make sure that there's adequate food on the table, and that is also when they can find jobs, because jobs are at a shortage. Or when they live in any other part of the world, which is so-called the developed world, where the markets are open, but they realize that the lives of a lot of those people are still caged. Whereas Cuba, for all its problems, is still free. Where GDPs have replaced happiness in other parts of the world, where peace and well-being are exchanged for money to buy things that promise the same peace and well-being in a tomorrow that never comes. So the question that is really left for all of you, for all of us, is what is the kind of world that we want to live in? What is the kind of world that we want for ourselves? That is for us to decide for ourselves. I'm not here to make that decision for you. Nobody can make that decision for you. I can't even influence you to make a decision at all in the first place. I believe all of us must strongly exercise our right to decide how we wish to lead our own lives, which is the fundamental value imbibed in Cuba. I want to show you that outside of Cuba, almost the entire world is caged in some way or the other. And this cage is made of a superstructure that I would like to talk to you about today. which exerts control over us by manipulating our emotions, which is also something that I will speak to you about today. Through the course of the rest of my conversation here today, I will walk you through what the superstructure is, how it affects our emotions, and how it is playing with Cuba and coercing Cuba to surrender and become a part of it. Let us begin with the first element of this conversation, the superstructure itself. The reason why we keep struggling to try and understand how our world is controlled, and why we keep coming up with these theories of who and what controls our world, is because there is no one thing that governs us. It is, and when people say that it's America, or it's Europe, or it's X or Y, it's a corporation, those are all, in all of history, those are always people that we want to try and identify to find this answer of who's controlling us, and then we point our fingers towards a particular individual or a particular country. But in reality, it is a structure. A superstructure which operates like a machine in a systemic manner, and as with every efficient machine, it is a sum of its carefully calibrated parts. It is instinctual for us human beings to point fingers at individuals or organizations when we are being critical of the state of our world. It is perhaps easier to analyze and assess the rationale behind the deprecating actions when we can name the perpetrator and establish their identity, background, and our understanding of their first pillar. That necessitates the transactional nature of every moment of our lives, which is facilitated by the second pillar, our education system and the way that it is utilized to cater to this market. And collectively, both the market and the education system get validated through the third pillar, which is mainstream dialogues in the media. That gives us a sense are the spokes of a wheel, mediums or goods or currencies in a transaction. The superstructure cannot invade Cuba until its people are willing to participate in this transaction, in this give and take, to permissions for transferring money to Cuba, long interrogations about our intent for visiting Cuba. But more importantly, they make it difficult to get transactional thought to lure a country's own people, governments, institutions to resist any effort of progress or development that do not align with the superstructure all over the world, influences the most impressionable of us human beings all over the world, influences the most impressionable of us human beings to join the market by way of what I call the incubation of a transactional thought. Mainstream dialogues and the media, law and order mechanisms geared towards ensuring conformity with this superstructure and to curb deviance in what I call the act of defending this transactional thought. Failing which, we turn to the justice system, which ensures that any and all deviances are addressed and which, with our needs being essential for our survival and our wants being things we wish for, but can survive without. At first, the desire to fulfill our inalienable needs of food, shelter, and clothing had been a driving force for our actions and the foundation of civilizations. And as these societies began to expand, rising populations and a limited amount of resources led to the origin of the idea of exchange about the formal market system, an organized collection of individuals trading in resources they had in abundance and acquiring what they lacked. These places of exchanges eventually grew bigger, with trade not being limited to individuals, but being amongst towns, cities, and countries. Finally, with entire towns and cities and countries craving to win in this trade, in these exchanges, it started a competition for who can amass the most resources, not just against each other, but within themselves. For instance, within the owner of a factory and its workers, or the leaders of a country and its people, the colonization of mind and land. And this craving was not just to win, but was to win every single time and to eventually win easily. The second pillar, the education system. When Da Vinci said that learning never exhausts the mind, he, at least I believe, was referring to inquisitiveness and jobs. The capitalistic nature of modern society ensures that economic benefits are closely intertwined with education. And anyone who strives to enjoy a higher standard of living must be useful to society in how they define the term useful. And yet, the superstructure ensures that this usefulness is predetermined by the market, rather than by the individuals through a journey of curiosity and self-exploration. The conformity and homogeneity of our education systems have a simple objective: to make schools and educations a one-size-fits-all system, however liberal the education system may be, and to ensure that there is no deviation. And even if there is deviation, it is within the perimeters that have been set for that deviation. Simply put, the idea is to create an institution that can accommodate peoples of all backgrounds and still impact the same knowledge and at the same time produce products out of our students who otherwise share a deep-rooted uniformity in terms of values, educations, thinkings, and aspirations, which all fall by the wayside. Anything outside this uniformity is actively discouraged and often punished across the world in different ways. Some do it mildly, some do it with a smile on their face, some do it in extreme situations, but it is still done. The superstructure ensures that only what is needed is taught, and what is taught must be seen as what is needed. Necessity. The third pillar, mainstream dialogue. The role of the media is to ensure that people are aware of the social, economic, and political developments taking place in the country and around the world. It helps individuals frame opinions, and when these opinions are collectively seen, it forms public opinion, which is nothing more than a collection of individual views and beliefs. However, almost all opinions are very less often free from the source, which means that the media also makes people aware of which collection of individuals holds these views and beliefs, and consequently whether you and I stand with these individuals or against these individuals. Now, digital technologies have superseded practically all traditional modes of communication, and it is imperative to note that this revolutionary breakthrough is radically redefining human interaction. And we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg as of right now. Online media, and especially social media, has created an opinion overdose, where opinions are formed, expressed fervently, defended fervently, and completely abandoned in a matter of days, if not hours, and if not minutes. While this was the same with traditional media, but the timeline was slightly longer and more spread out, and hence much less chaotic. This chaos has resulted in a haste to quickly find our position with respect to different groups and communities based on the beliefs and views and opinions we hold, whether Cuba is right or whether is America right. The rest of the world decides that literally in a snap of a finger by the first thing that they have heard. At the end of the day, in order to make sure that this superstructure continues to do this, we are asked not just to validate the opinions of this community that we agree with, but all opinions that this community has had and will have. Otherwise, we will be kicked out. Similarly, we are asked to disagree with the opinions of all communities that we do not belong to, and no exceptions are tolerated. No middle grounds are allowed to exist, and the longer we sit on the fence, and some of us do, and I'm sure many of us in this room perhaps try to find the neutral ground. But most of us are very unwelcome in the majority that is out there. We're constantly shown how validating our communities blindly and invalidating its opponents blindly will allow us to enjoy being the member of the former for longer. This allows us to find strength, care, and support as long as we are actively providing proof to be allies, especially out in the public. And that's what this does. The feeling of togetherness, the false feeling of togetherness. The fourth pillar is policy making. To put it in simple terms, a policy is a required action which lies in the range of advice to rule for public welfare, for the protection and betterment of all sections of societies without any external forces or bias. In reality, though, policies in most parts of the world end up protecting the welfare of a select few, which is why there is rarely an incentive for the masses to implement them. Now, a good question all of us must ponder over at this point in time is that if we are so rational and aware of a thread that cuts across all people everywhere in the world, while we may choose to believe that we must uphold every law to maintain order, The fact is that blind acceptance of all laws can prove to be equally destructive, because then every individual would be reduced to a mere puppet and a clone of the other. But human beings are complex beings with varying moral and ethical codes. It will not be wrong to assume that each one of us is not immune to influence, manipulation, or motivation, which may cause alterations in our behavior. And these deviations may result in us breaking rules. However, the superstructure uses the same influence, the same manipulation and motivation tactic for ensuring that we do not break these rules, that we do not question these rules, and that we understand the severity of punitive action if we do, offending us. Regardless of which of these groups one may fall in, the superstructure targets the same space in our mind: fear. Because a large type of recurring conflict is between those who benefit from this transactional thought and those who do not benefit from this transactional thought, which is why it needs to be quick, because if it wasn't and we got the time situations, and we are all aware of that. However, they perhaps may still not be the real culprits here. Yes, they profit from the conflict, but they do not influence the duration and outcome of a war or the way that it is waged. The real powers at fault are the active war profiteers. Will find sufficiently harsh. A daily life example of this is the family of a worker in a third world country in the developing nations who perhaps earns only about 1,000 Cuban pesos a month, as what is told to us. Regardless of how we answer this question, and I'm sorry, it becomes difficult for me to continue to read what I've written, because found and implemented, it is pointless for them to stay in conflict and find a solution. We need to fight the superstructure itself and not each other. Not the US, not the embargo, not anyone else, but we need to fight this overall superstructure that makes the US do what it has done. Each part of this superstructure influences our emotions. It feeds on them, to ensure that we are stuck in a long repeating transactional thought in our minds until it becomes a habit, and then it becomes a way of life, right through history. And it's not just new right now. Right through history, this has been happening. The first line of defense against the superstructure, at least in my opinion, is a deepened understanding of our own emotions, our human emotions. In essence, the superstructure leads us to believe that we are not in control and cannot control our emotions. And rather, we're obligated to change our choices in line with our emotions. That's what the superstructure tells us. Staying in a favorable emotional state and avoiding undesirable emotional states becomes the primary objective of daily life. And the solutions that the superstructure offers are entirely extrinsic, materialistic, and transactional. Not intrinsic, not within ourselves, but outside of us. This explains why we are constantly asked to buy products and services that are supposed to make us happy, why we are taught that happiness is a must and sadness must be avoided at all costs in life, why we are constantly shown how happy the lives of those who comply with the superstructure are, and the anger and the hate faced by those who don't. And finally, why we must never dare to challenge the assumptions behind these distinctions. Now, this may seem like an oversimplification, but in reality, the way that we deal with our emotions is not very different. We oversimplify what these emotions represent and the choices we must make to either sustain or prevent them, relying on an oversimplified definition of positive and negative emotions. We do this to ourselves. These emotions, as I said previously, are the fuel for the superstructure, and our lack of understanding of our emotions is what allows them to prosper, the superstructure to prosper. Let me show you how they are the fuel, and how we can perhaps choose to break free if we chose to do so. And these are only examples, because our emotions are plenty. Each one of us will have different emotions governing the reasons why we do what we do. But amongst other emotions, the market system plays on our emotions related to convenience and the emotion set around that. It makes us think that transactional thought can provide us with the comfort and with an easy life. But convenience is not necessarily positive all the time, because it leads at times to complacency, selfishness, and greed. It is these emotions from where the transactional thought emerges. How do we stop it from emerging then? Perhaps by moving to the cluster of emotions around nourishment rather than convenience. Because when we see the market system as a means to satisfy the nourishment of our bodies and our minds, we do not think in the industrial concepts of trade and accumulation and commerce and economies and profiteering, give and take, but rather in the agrarian concepts of cultivation, ecosystems, cooperatives, and balance. The same concepts that led to our evolution as human beings of our ancestors. The education system primarily plays on our emotions relating to necessity, by making us believe that it is impossible to survive without learning this transactional thought. This has resulted in a hierarchy where STEM disciplines, the sciences, technology, education, economics, maths, they take priority over the humanities and arts, where utility of an individual takes precedence over the versatility of an individual. In this space, the superstructure incubates transactional thoughts in the minds of our people. This incubation can only perhaps be resisted if we move towards emotions related to curiosity, to open-mindedness and experimentation, and to be able to question the alternative solutions through which our survival can be achieved. Curiosity and education, ironically, is where capitalism also emerged from. But unfortunately, curiosity is also the one thing that was controlled the most by capitalism, to not allow for any other ideas after that or solutions to be found or improvised upon. They took control over our curiosity. So even when there are in a large part of schools and colleges across the world where they are spoken to, students are spoken to and told to think free, to think open, it is still within that cage that they are provided. The mainstream media and dialogues, which is the third pillar, it influences our urge for togetherness, for finding connections and belongingness. But because of the projection of a transactional thought, in order to gain this belongingness, we're asked to lose our individuality. We're constantly shown that as long as we are giving validation, even if it's false, that we will continue to receive that validation as well. The emotions, perhaps, that break this projection are those around harmony and not togetherness. They may seem similar, but they're not. When we move towards the emotions of harmony, we can build narratives that project respect despite our differences, and only when our mainstream media has space for all realities to coexist on a level plane, the projection will break, and our lenses can see the world for what it is, and not what is shown to us. The next, policy frameworks. They influence our emotions around certainty. By codifying transactional thought in doctrines and mandates and laws, telling us how to lead our lives, in our discussions of policy frameworks, we spoke of these rules. And we also spoke of how rules and our emotions around certainty lead us to believing that we are where we need to be. This restricts our movement to another set of emotions that led to our evolution as humans, the emotions surrounding adaptability. Our policies, because of codification and certainty, fail to change with the evolution of our minds and our behaviors as a society. This is what Fidel asked for everyone to do, to continue to keep adapting as we go along, because the same rules and laws that were applicable and that were useful to society 5 years ago may not be applicable today. And society must continue to evolve, but all across our world, that evolution of policy is very, very painstaking. When we can move from policy frameworks to symbolize a means of being adaptive while resisting the emotional urge to be certain, we break the ability for transactional thought to be codified and be mandated in our lives, and we break free. Penultimately, law and order plays with an emotion which I have already spoken of, felt when we deal with law and order, fear. And I'm also certain that we all assume that the emotion that we need to move towards when it comes to law and order is perhaps safety. But it isn't that, because the illusion of safety can be very, very easily manipulated by this superstructure. And that's what it does. And the defense of transactional thought can make us feel safe, but to fight this defense, we need to move towards our emotions around learning. When we do so, our institutions of law and order become educational in nature, and the objective changes from defense to discussion. For us, we move from fearing the law to beginning to understand it. Because in fear, we close our eyes. But in learning, we observe. Through this observation, we negate the need for enforcement because we are no longer scared of deviance, but responsible for understanding when one has to take such actions and how others can avoid such actions. We take control. Finally, our conflict resolution processes, the enforcement of transactional thought plays with our emotions related to closure. Simply put, the superstructure makes us actively avoid conflict. And if we land in one, to want to close it swiftly, to get it over with it. It does this, as I'm sure you can see, because if conflict extends, we will soon realize that almost all conflicts are rooted in the transactional nature of the superstructure itself. This is why it employs enforcement. Yet, if we move from our emotional urges to seek closure and move towards the emotions that govern endurance, the enforcers will fail, because we allow each other to exist in conflict for as long as it takes to find solutions that can break this transactional thought. If we can ensure that despite being in conflict, our emotions push us to tolerate each other, to be with each other, to not harm each other, and to endure the time and effort it takes to arrive at a resolution, we rid the enforcer of its power by resisting these transactional solutions. Now, at this juncture, and before I come to a close, I want to re-emphasize and perhaps explain better a very simple word that I have been using over and over again in the last few minutes. The word move, moving from one to another, one emotion to another. Now, I have been asking you to move from this one set of emotion to another, to redirect this energy in motion, because that's what emotions are. It's mover, energy in motion. It's the literal translation of emotions. And if we recognize the fact that all energy can transfer, can move, can take different shapes, we can recognize that we can control our emotions, we can understand our emotions, and we can move amongst our emotions from the emotions that make us trapped within this transactional thought to exactly in the same situation to emotions that can free us from a transactional thought. This movement, the moment we understand it, we will recognize that it's within us to break free, if we want it to. Now, these emotions, our emotions, they possess material properties which we can use to break away from these transactional thought. Now, in my opinion, our emotions exist on a level that connects by a path, which allows for us to move from one emotion to another emotion. Now, while there are, of course, other properties that emotions have, like malleability, fungibility, and others, today I will perhaps only focus on this one, movability. Because our emotions can move, and we can move with them, away from this transactional thought, horizontally, vertically, laterally, well beyond the superstructure. I strongly believe that Cuba and its people are some of the most capable people to do so, because they understand movement in its truest sense. Our emotions, consequently, have become an extremely important part of us that has to be addressed when we speak of the superstructure that controls our world, because even though we may not recognize our emotions to be at the core of all that we do, the superstructure clearly does. And the moment we recognize that it's not about America, it's not about the war, it is about our emotions, that's when we will recognize what we can do to fight this. I also believe that if we look at what is happening in Cuba now, it would start to make a lot more sense. There is a widespread fear that is being directed at Cuba. The fear of missing out from the rest of the world. And the superstructure is banking on this fear to push Cuba towards a state of acute deprivation, upon reaching which Cuba is expected to surrender into adopting the open market and systems that are deeply rooted in all other parts of our world. The truth to this is visible in a memo that was created by the US government that everyone has access to but no one talks about, where it stated very clearly that they will keep Cuba so deprived, keep the people of Cuba so deprived that it will force the people to overthrow Fidel Castro. It is available in the public domain in declassified memos, but no one talks about that. They wanted to force the country to join with the rest of the world by playing on the emotions of the people of Cuba. For that matter, look at us in India. Even though that we are friends with Cuba and our country recently completed 63 years of friendship, we still struggle to make simple phone calls to Cuba. In our attempt to transport the paintings by children in India that depict the universal human principles of liberty, equality, and freedom, and the life and ideals of Jose Marti, a national hero, we were asked to prove our reason for sending these paintings here to Cuba because they seemed to be political material. My own journey here was stretched to close to 72 hours to get here, because many people are no longer allowed to travel to Havana from some of the major cities in the world because of invented reasons. From the UAE, only Cuban nationals and UAE nationals can travel to Cuba, no one from any other part of the world. That's the law. The superstructure and its visible manifestations have made it so inconvenient at every step of the way that a large part of the world will get discouraged, or worse, be pushed to rationalize that the restrictions on Cuba must be for good reason, because they are not allowed to engage. And it is no surprise that the capitalistic North American and European states as well are the ones who put this into action many, many years ago and continue to do so, because they are perhaps the most aligned with the superstructure and its transactional thought. They are the ones who seem to have fallen prey to this illusion the fastest and the deepest. And I do not blame them, because again, I must reiterate, it is the superstructure that they have fallen prey to. It is not them themselves. I can only then extrapolate this contention in line with my understanding of the superstructure and say that they must also be the ones most in fear, the North American nations and the European nations, in fear of accepting reality, in fear of failing to break free, and in fear of opening their eyes and looking at the struggles of their own people. And therefore, they can only maintain character and pretend that it is those who do not submit to the superstructure who are the ones to blame for the crisis that our civilization faces, countries like Cuba and not them. The superstructure forces them to show a maximized version of their happiness and a minimized version of people such as those in Cuba. Whereas for most of us who have traveled to Europe and to America and who are now here in Cuba, we can see that the smiles on the faces of Cubans is much, much wider than the smiles on the faces on the roads of people in North America and in Europe. They are hypnotized to only look at the death, the ugliness, the sadness, and the fear in those countries that reject this transactional thought. And yet, it is here in Cuba that Marti reminded us that nature is beautiful, that life is a duty, that death is not ugly, that no one should be sad or intimidated as long as there are books in the bookstores and light in the sky and friends and mothers. In my days here, as I walked across Cuba, I saw that nature is beautiful. And there are books in the libraries, and there is light in the sky, and there are friends and there are mothers. I saw Marti's Cuba, one of the few remaining places on our planet where the law of love has not been defeated by the law of hatred and by this transactional thought. I can only do my part in showing this to the world wherever I go. I can only do my part in speaking of the people here and the conversations I've had to whoever I speak with. I hope that in doing that, I can also help Cuba and its people in remembering how Fidel saw life, where the quality of life lies in knowledge, in culture. Values are what constitutes true quality of life, the supreme quality of life, even above food, shelter, and clothing. Because food, shelter, and clothing can be solved for by bringing people together, such as the organizers of this conference have done here today with all of us. But values, once sacrificed, once sold, once exchanged for convenience, take generations to be regained. Culture, once forgotten and foregone, takes ages to be remembered again. Control, once surrendered to the superstructure, to this machine, requires revolutions to be seized. And Cuba, in my opinion, has already emerged victor in its revolution and continues to do so more than any other part of the world. It is more free than any other part of the world. I hope finally that Cuba can be the one piece of land, the one people that can show the rest of the world how this machine that controls them can be broken. And that needs all of you in this room and outside to pick up your pens and write, to speak of Cuba and to speak of these realities to everyone you can, so that we can give back to Cuba the hope of a better world that it has given to us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Le damos las gracias a todos. El servicio de interpretación está contratado hasta las 16:50 y nos hemos pasado el tiempo. No sé si alguien quizás en inglés tenga algo que preguntarle, que conversar con el señor Ramit. Excelente todo lo que nos ha estado transmitiendo, importante lo que nos ha estado diciendo del mundo en que vivimos. ¿Algún compañero? Bueno, otro aplauso para Ramit. Entonces, y muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But again, I do want to reiterate this to everyone, that please write more, please talk more about Cuba. Whenever you go back to your home countries, and I see many people from different countries here, when you go back to your home countries, please talk more about Cuba to everyone, so that everyone knows what you've experienced here and what Cuba has given to us. Please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much.